Hello, I recently finished The Sun King by Nancy Mitford and I want to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it. The Sun King, according to the back of this NYRB edition that I have, is a dazzling double portrait of Louis XIV and Versailles, which for the most part, I would agree. I think this is a biography of the court of Louis XIV at Versailles specifically, in my opinion, more so than it is just about him or the building. He is definitely the heavy focus, but close behind him in page time are his mistresses and general life at Versailles. Louis XIV's personal life takes precedent over his public or political life. So if you want a detailed overview of Louis XIV's actual reign, this is not the book for you. And so if you're someone who, like me, has a passing knowledge of Louis XIV, but really perhaps the last time you learned much about him was, again, just using my own personal experience, AP Euro, back in high school. It didn't necessarily give me a better picture of France at this time, but I think I understand at least the persona of Louis XIV better, and in general, Versailles and just the people that surrounded Louis XIV at this time. So this is my first introduction to Nancy, or really anything Mitford related. So I want to briefly mention this because I did do some Googling, and I asked a friend who's really into history. I was like, hey, have you ever read anything by Nancy Mitford? And she was like, no, but the Mitfords are like a crazy family. All of their daughters are crazy. And I was like, oh, okay. One of them was obsessed with Hitler, loved him, loved him. And then there was others that were Nazis. Some of them weren't Nazis. It was a whole thing. So I don't really know anything about that. And then Nancy herself is well known to be a novelist. I think actually her novels, her fiction is more popular or more well known than her nonfiction, although she does have 3 or 4 biographies like this. She has one on the Sun King, she has one on Madame de Pompadour, Voltaire, and Frederick the Great as well. I had never heard of her before I picked up this book, and I only picked up this book because, it caught my eye at the nonfiction section of my bookstore. But so anyway, my first introduction to Nancy, but I could immediately tell how much she loved not just Louis XIV, but this era of French aristocracy and just court life in general. So on one hand, her obvious affection for her topic made this book very energetic. It made it very infectious. It really felt like it was just a friend I invited over, and she was passionately giving me a PowerPoint presentation on her special interest of the week, or her entire life, She kind of gave you information a little bit like you were in the court itself, and she was, a noblewoman that you knew that she was passing on gossip that she had heard. You could really just feel her, Nancy Mitford's enthusiasm for this topic. On the other hand, though, so that's the positive of that, but on the other hand, it left her with practically no separation from her topic, and everything was infused with her own biases. So I'm not a big history reader. I'm not a big nonfiction reader. So what makes a good history? I can't really break it all down. But I think I know enough to know that it's important to understand the biases of the person presenting you this history, and for that person as well to be aware of them and address them or try to mitigate them. And it just didn't feel like that really happened at all with Nancy in this. While she doesn't necessarily paint Louis XIV as a saint, right? She does acknowledge that he has some personality quirks and blind spots, and she even admits several times this was just a mistake that he made, point blank, period. She does do a lot to mitigate his worst actions, or just as devastating, his inactions. And I don't particularly need a historian to staunchly denounce every crime one of these old absolute monarchs has done. I was not expecting that. I was not requiring that she tells me every atrocity that Louis XIV let happen or ordered. But she also just goes too far the other way, where she almost infantilizes him in a way where she's like, oh, poor Louis knew nothing about the suffering of the religious minorities after he repelled their legal protections against persecution and violence. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening. And obviously no one could tell him what was happening because it would have broken his heart. Okay. I don't know if I believe you on that. Louis didn't like to hear about the poverty of his people because there was nothing he, a mere mortal king, could do to help them. Oh, by the way, he spent $3,000, or he spent 3,000 francs or whatever. He spent a large sum of money every day gambling. Well, it sounds like maybe he could have done something. Maybe he cut his gambling budget in half, or no, he could, no. It just hurt his heart too much to think about his poor people. living in absolute squalor. He just froze with inaction because he was so heartbroken about it. Like, who are you trying to kid here? Like, who are you trying to kid? She attempts to walk a line between Louis XIV was brilliant and terrifying in this fantastic statesman, and also nothing was his fault. It was always someone else's fault. He didn't know. How could he have known? And it really wasn't that bad. And she just fails multiple times to walk that line because that's impossible. It's impossible to convince us so thoroughly of his innocence while at the same time convincing us of his brilliance as a political man with literally absolute power in France. But she clearly has a very romanticized view of this time, of Louis XIV. This is where I think you start to, I did like the barest hint of a Google on her name, but you just do that and you see that she herself comes from a family of like British aristocracy, and you start to connect some dots, right? I think her roots and her class colors everything in this book about how she presents Louis XIV as, like I said, he's not a saint. She doesn't quite sanctify him, but she worships him. It is also very hard to know what was her editorializing versus what she was pulling from primary sources. There's no source list, I don't think. I think there might be. Yes, there is a source list. Okay. But she doesn't use footnotes to like say exactly where she pulled this information from. And so for me, it was incredibly hard to figure out, is this the opinion of someone at that time? Is this her opinion? Is this like historical, general fact or opinion? Is this a primary source? I couldn't tell. And so it's hard to distinguish fact from opinion. I left not fully confident on what history I truly learned versus what Mitford's interpretation of that history was that I was learning, you know? And again, this just goes to how she presented it. Like I said, it's very much like your friend is just telling you everything she knows. And like when that happens, it very much is more informal. You're not yourself noting down, okay, and what was that source that you just kind of like let them talk and you're like, okay. And so like that's kind of what was going on here. Again, it helped to keep it moving and engaging, but at the same time, like as an actual source of history, I don't feel fully confident in how truthful or complete it was. Now, that doesn't mean that it was not truthful or complete. Besides a few of those, like, I'm pretty confident on some of these biases, right? But I, who am not going to like sit here and look up every source to fact check her, sorry, that's just like not what I'm going to do. I don't find that interesting. I don't feel confident in it because I didn't know what was her opinion and what was the opinion of court at that time. And she doesn't really supply a lot of evidence to support her conclusions, in my opinion, that I can like easily tell, okay, this is the evidence she's using for this. There are a couple times where she kind of breaks down like this is clearly a rumor because XYZ, but other than that, I'm like, I don't know what's real and what's not. I will say, especially in early chapters, there is some antisemitism and xenophobia displayed by Mitford. Particularly when it comes to Louis XIV's like looks and ancestry. I guess he has some Moorish ancestry in his like royal family history. She is kind of obsessed with this. Like Mitford even assures us that his nose, quote, only became Jewish when he was old, and like that it wasn't that he had a very nice nose before then. And then you think about how her sister was like a Nazi, was like a Hitler-loving Nazi, and you're like, I don't think she was, but this book was published in 1966, and you can just, and again, with her class and her upbringing, you can tell, you can really feel some of her biases that go just beyond, like, forget the biases that she has towards Louis XIV, like her prejudices on real life people today. You can feel it. There's also a lot of homophobia in this book, and it's really hard, again, for me. I'm not really sure if this homophobia originates authentically in Louis XIV or from Mitford. But either way, like they share a disgust in this book for homosexuality, particularly like Louis's brother. I guess his name is like Monsignor, I don't know. He was well known at the time to be gay or to be whatever. Maybe we call him bisexual because he has a wife and I think he has kids. But like, you know, to participate in gay acts. And so at first it's kind of presented like Louis XIV did not like this about his brother, but he kind of allowed it because it was his brother. He looked the other way. He didn't enforce rules that he could have done. It was a source of tension and conflict for those two men because Louis didn't like it and Monsieur knew he didn't like it and he still did it and like kind of spread this attitude around court, right? That's fine if that's true. But Mitford herself seems to like as well have a lot of homophobia. Again, 1960, I'm not shocked by this. And given all of the other places where she doesn't check her biases, again, it's not shocking that she doesn't check her bias on this, but I really was like, now how much did Louis XIV really hate this versus how much is this Mitford saying she hated this, or what? Like, I could not tell where the homophobia was stronger between Louis XIV or Mitford, and that's hard. And it's just a piece of warning that if you want to read this, like, just know the homophobia is not stuck in just the 17th century. It is in Mitford herself, and I feel like you can really feel that, just like you can feel the anti-Semitism. Like, I'm sure there was anti-Semitism towards Louis XIV or his ancestry at that time. That's, again, fine for you to address that and acknowledge that and talk about this anti-Semitism that he perhaps experienced because of his, but you don't need to perpetuate that yourself as the author. Despite that, I suspect that this probably fails in multiple ways as like a really good history text because of her prejudices, because the sources kind of seem unclear. I would still kind of recommend it for someone interested in Versailles and the court of the Sun King, kind of like, again, like I was. As I said, it will be confusing depending on what other history of this time that you go into the book with. I came in with very little. It didn't confuse me enough that I was like, okay, I don't understand anything, but there's a lot of like external context that I think Mitford kind of just assumes you have. Like, she'll mention this war with Austria or Italy or England, and I don't know why they're at war, and she will not tell you why they're at war. She's just like, they're at war, and then she'll name drop like this battle, and she's like, of course, when this battle happened, it caused a big stir, and I'm like, I don't know what that battle is. I don't know why that would cause an issue. Did they win? Did they lose? I don't know, and she is not interested in telling you. Again, depending on how much history or how much knowledge you come in already on this time period, you might be able to take more from it than others. So like I said, the background politics goes unexplained. I don't know why France was at war all the time. I don't know why they had the biggest army like ever. I don't know any of that. Also, there are like a million character names dropped, and several of them are like the exact same name, just like 2 or 3 letters off, and they fulfill like the exact same role. Like, his 2 mistresses get titles that are almost exactly the same, and it was really hard for me to remember which mistress was which. And some of that is just like, I'm not that familiar with the French language, although I studied it for a very long time, believe it or not. So I think obviously for an English speaker, like, it's probably more confusing than if you're French. It's very easy to differentiate. But for me, I was like, I don't quite remember if this was mistress 1 or 2. So that's just a note that try to take notes. I did like eventually have to like open up my notes app and like write down who was who. And I would say like that is another issue with this edition. I don't know if other editions have it. They don't have like an index of characters. They don't have a family tree, which would have been extremely helpful. It was just confusing to keep it all straight. I wish my edition came with something like that to help me. Everyone is referred to by their title. So it's like King Louis's brother's name is blank. I can't even remember. But he was referred to as like Monsieur, like this title, which he was pretty easy because I think he was the only Monsieur, but like his wife was referred to as Madam, but Louis XIV also called his first wife Madam and also his second wife Madam. And so there would be times where I would like, I don't know which Madam is speaking here. And the king has like 1 million children, 1 million bastards. Several of them have Duke. It was confusing to figure out who was who. I'm not necessarily saying that's like a knock against this book, because I feel like sometimes there's always how it is with biographies like this, but I'm just telling you, it was kind of confusing. So with all of that said, I gave this book a 3.25. It's helped by being pretty short. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think it needed to be much longer. It ends on 225 pages. The 3.25 kind of does reflect more of again, I'm not a historian, like I'm not an academic, so I can only give you my impressions on where I think this fails. And so that's kind of where it lost a lot of stars. I didn't feel like this got into like the realm of fiction where she was just like repeating wild rumors just for the hell of it. However, it did not feel 100% nuanced or full picture view of Versailles. It just felt you could just tell that she loves this time and these people, and not even all of them, some of the people she disliked, and she had a very negative opinion on them, and you could like get that from the book. So I just think her biases, whether they were of that time, about that time and those people, or more to her time, whatever her biases were, you could just feel it, and it unfortunately kind of diminishes it a little bit in that regard. But like I said, I still kind of would recommend it. I think it's also interesting to just read this history as itself kind of historical in a way, because it was published in 1960, and I just think that the way that we probably would view the time period today would be very different than hers, again, especially considering her own class colors, like I said, it just colors this book completely. So anyway, that is The Sun King by Nancy Mitford. And this was the first book I read in March of 2026. So read it, don't read it. If you have read it, let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts on it, or if you know a lot about like Louis XIV, let me know. If anything I said kind of sounded like strange or odd. If you've heard about this book, Nancy Mitford, or the Mitford sisters in general, they're, like I said, I think they themselves like now have books about them, because there's like 6 of them and they all had very interesting stories, and it's just interesting to see how this group of girls kind of live such different lives. I will probably read another Nancy Mitford. I think it would be good to go to another one going into it, knowing a little bit more about her and knowing like some of the biases that I could pick up just from reading this, especially that since she focuses so much on the aristocracy. And then I want to try a fiction novel of hers as well, because like I said, that is more, I guess, what she's famous for, although I had not heard of her in either regard before I picked up this book. So that's gonna be it for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Yep, that's everything that you have to do. And thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Stay safe, sane, and healthy. Bye.